We're going to take you live now to Sydney, where opposition leader Anthony Albanese is speaking.
Turn up to work, or in order to feed their kids, or to simply miss out on that income that they need. We've also seen the casual employment with people without proper training being employed at the heart of the spread of this virus. What we need to do is to think about how we can emerge from this crisis with a stronger economy and a stronger society. An economy that works for people, not the other way around. And that's why we need to do much better than what Josh Frydenberg offered with the statement on Thursday, and then again with his statement to the National Press Club. We now know as well that the government was giving consideration to removing sole traders from the JobKeeper program. The government needs to explain exactly what it had in mind. The fact that Treasury released documentation saying that they'd assumed that the government decision was to exclude sole traders shows just how far down the track this went. There's the other issue which Labor will examine about JobKeeper, which is the number of people who are likely to be excluded as a result of the criteria that they've established for businesses. The fact is that a range of businesses saw their income improve short term and then saw it decrease again when the coronavirus pandemic hit Victoria hard in recent weeks. So we may well see, if you look at the June month, a spike in income short term, which would exclude businesses from receiving JobKeeper, but then them go back into a downturn, those very businesses. If we're going to protect jobs, we need to examine the details of JobKeeper as they are rather than as we want them to be. And there needs to be a fair analysis to give businesses and their employees the support that they need during this difficult time. Happy to take questions. Well, what I support is the international law of the sea being implemented and all countries abiding by it. That's why we have multilateral forums. That's why the idea of negative globalism that was once espoused by Scott Morrison is a bad one. We need not just Australia to support those international regulations, but we need all nations, including China, to abide by the rulings that have been made.
This will raise the ire of Beijing and lead to further retaliation from China?
Well, Australia needs to defend the Australian national interest, and we also need to stand up for international law. And the international law of the sea provides for freedom of navigation, which is absolutely critical to international trade.
With Australia, do you think that we should take an even stronger stance on China as the US would like?
Well, Australia needs to defend our national interest, and that means also, as a middle power, ensuring that we abide by, and we call upon other countries to abide by, international organisations. That's why Australia's been quite right, and I'm sure it will be raised with the US this week, to oppose any withdrawal from the WHO. Those international multilateral forums are absolutely essential to govern what is a globalised world.
And with those discussions in the US taking place, do you think it's the right decision to send Senator Payne and Senator Reynolds to Washington, given COVID-19?
Look, it's absolutely the right thing for Australia to participate and to engage with the United States. The United States is our most important ally, and it's important that these discussions take place and I certainly wish the Defence and Foreign Minister well. I'm sure that there'll be appropriate safety mechanisms put in place.
And what would you like to see come out of those talks in Washington?
Well, look, these talks are important. It's important at this time in particular, where the world is dealing with a global pandemic, but that's also having an impact on the global economy. The Australian ministers need to stress Australia's national interest as well. We saw with the decision on Bali an issue whereby Australia was disadvantaged. We need to make sure that in decisions that the United States makes in terms of its relationship with China, that Australia doesn't suffer due to consideration not being given to Australia's national interest.
And just with JobKeeper, you want the government to support more businesses, but you also don't. You've also released, said that you don't want the government to go further into deficit. So how do you balance the two?
No, well, what we've said is that spending is entirely appropriate, but it needs to be the right spending and it needs to be targeted, and it needs to not cause undue waste. We've criticised very clearly the fact that so many people missed out on JobKeeper. Those casual employees are still missing out. The Donata workers are still missing out. Visa holders still missing out. So many people have been excluded. University lecturers and people who work at universities have missed out. We need to make sure that the principle of employers keeping a relationship with their employees, which is the basis of wage subsidies that Labor called for well before the government decided to support wage subsidies, is an important one. We don't want people to be left behind, but we also want to make sure that in the recovery phase, no one is held back from opportunity. So no one left behind during the pandemic, but no one held back during the recovery. How do we grow the economy stronger? How do we have appropriate industry policies to support advanced manufacturing? How do we make work more secure? How do we provide training and skills for people? How do we build the infrastructure that will actually lead to productivity growth and to growth in the future? That's the forward planning that's missing from this government's approach. And we want an economy that's stronger, an economy that's fairer, and an economy that works for people, not the other way around. Thanks very much. Questions on the phone?
Albanese Taylor from 7 News. Should the Australian government be doing more to secure commercial arrangements with international drug companies if the vaccine becomes available overseas?
Well, the Australian government needs to do everything that it can to make sure that Australians gain access to any vaccination should it become available. And Australia needs to participate in those international discussions. We also need to, of course, support our scientists here. There's important work taking place in Queensland and in other places, including through the CSIRO. That's why support for science is something that has been neglected by this government. It's quite extraordinary that the CSIRO have had cuts to its budget under this government, the very body that we're relying upon to make a difference and to save lives.